Some of you listening to me today are here for a reason. You didn't stumble upon this by accident. God led you here because He has a word for you, a promise for you, and a door He is about to open in your life. Some of you have been waiting, praying, believing, and you're wondering, Lord, when will it happen? When will I see the breakthrough? But let me tell you today, God's timing is never late, never early, but always perfect. There are moments in life when it feels like nothing is moving, nothing is changing, and nothing is happening. You pray and the answer doesn't come. You knock, but the door remains closed. You seek, but the path ahead is unclear. And in those moments, the enemy whispers, maybe God has forgotten you. Maybe the promise isn't for you. Maybe it's never going to happen. But I want to remind you today that the enemy is a liar. Because my Bible says in Ecclesiastes 3:11 that God makes everything beautiful in its time. That means He is working even when you don't see it. That means His hand is moving even when the situation looks the same. Some of you are in a waiting season right now, and you don't understand why things are taking so long. You've been faithful, you've trusted God, you've held on to His promises, but still the door hasn't opened. And it's hard, I know it's hard. But I want to encourage you today, just because you don't see anything happening doesn't mean God isn't working. Think of a seed buried deep in the soil. You don't see its roots pushing through the dirt. You don't see it growing, stretching toward the surface. But in the right season, when the time is perfect, that seed will break through the ground and bear fruit. And the same is true in your life. There is a divine timing over everything God does. You may be waiting, but God is not late. You may feel delayed, but God has not forgotten you. Isaiah 60:22 says, at the right time, I, the Lord, will make it happen. Not when you want it, not when you expect it, but when He knows the time is right. Because God's timing is always tied too soon. You won't be ready for it. If He opens the door before you're prepared, what was meant to bless you might overwhelm you. But when He moves in His perfect timing, it will be unstoppable, undeniable, and exactly what you need. Look at Abraham. God promised him that he would be the father of many nations. But for years he had no son. He waited, he prayed, he trusted, but nothing changed. And like many of us, he probably wondered, did I hear God wrong? Did I miss my opportunity? But at the appointed time, when it seemed impossible, when Sarah was past the age of childbearing, God fulfilled His promise. Because what seems delayed to us is right on time for God. Think of Joseph. He had dreams of greatness, dreams of leadership, dreams of influence. But instead of stepping into his destiny, he was thrown into a pit, sold into slavery, and locked in a prison. Everything in his life seemed to be going in the wrong direction. But what Joseph didn't see was that each setback was actually a setup. Each closed door was leading him closer to the palace. And when the timing was right, in one moment, in one day, everything changed. The prison doors opened, and Joseph stepped into the fulfillment of everything God had promised. And I wonder, how many of you are standing on the edge of that moment? How many of you are one step away from the door opening? What if you're closer than you think? What if the breakthrough is just around the corner? What if everything you've been praying for is about to come to pass? I want to challenge you today. Don't give up because it's taking longer than you expected. Don't stop believing because you haven't seen the answer yet. God is not a man that He should lie. If He said it, He will do it. If He promised it, He will fulfill it. Your prayers are not in vain. Your faithfulness has not gone unnoticed. And when the time is right, when the season is ready, when God has prepared you for what's coming, He will open the door. And when He does, nothing and no one will be able to stop it. All through the Bible, we see that when God wants to do something new in someone's life, He often starts by closing a door. Maybe you've lost a job. Maybe a relationship has ended. Maybe a dream you held on to for years seems further away than ever before. But hear me today, just because a door has closed doesn't mean God has forgotten you. It means He has something better, something greater, A new door is about to open, and it's going to be bigger than anything you could have planned for yourself. When a door closes, it's easy to feel discouraged. It's easy to ask, why, God? Why did this happen? Why did I have to lose that opportunity? Why did that relationship end? Why didn't it work out the way I thought it would? But what if that closed door was not rejection, but redirection? What if God was protecting you from something you couldn't see? What if he was closing the wrong door so he could open the right one? Think about Noah. For years he preached to the people, warning them of the coming flood, urging them to turn back to God. But no one listened. When the time came, God shut the door of the ark himself. It wasn't Noah who closed it, it was God. And once that door was shut, there was no going back. For those outside, it was a door of judgment. But for Noah and his family, it was a door of protection. God knew what was coming, and he sealed them in for their safety. And I wonder, how many doors has God shut in your life for your protection? You may not see it now, but sometimes what feels like rejection is actually God's way of saying, I have something better. That relationship that didn't work out, maybe it wasn't God's best for you. That job you didn't get, maybe it would have taken you away from his plan. That opportunity that slipped through your fingers, maybe it wasn't meant to be yours because God is preparing something greater. Think of Ruth. She thought her life was over when her husband died. She was in a foreign land with no security, no future, no idea where to go next. But instead of staying in Moab, she chose to follow Naomi to Bethlehem. And when she arrived, she had nothing. She had to glean in the fields just to survive. But little did she know, God had a new door waiting for her. A door that would lead her to Boaz, to redemption, to a place in the lineage of Jesus Christ himself. You see, when one door closes, it's because God has a new door ahead. A door that leads to something better. A door that leads to greater blessings, greater purpose, greater impact. But the challenge is this. You can't stand in front of the closed door forever. Some of you are still looking back, still wondering why that door shut, still mourning what you lost. But God is saying, stop looking at what's behind you and start looking at what's ahead. Because you can't walk into the new if you're still holding on to the old. Think of the Israelites. When God brought them out of Egypt, they had to leave everything behind, the place they had known, the life they had lived. It was all gone. And when things got tough, they started looking back, saying, maybe we should go back to Egypt. But God had closed that door for a reason. They weren't meant to go back. They were meant to move forward. And the same is true for you. If God has shut a door in your life, don't try to force it open again. Don't try to go back to something he has removed. Trust that he knows what he's doing. Trust that he has a better door ahead. Because when he closes one door, it's always because he's about to open another. And when that new door opens, you'll look back and realize that the closed doors weren't setbacks, setups for something greater, something more powerful, something that will take you exactly where God wants you to be. Think of Joseph. He had dreams of leadership, of greatness, but instead of stepping into a palace, he found himself in a pit, then a prison. He must have wondered, Lord, did I hear you wrong? Did I misunderstand my calling? But what Joseph couldn't see was that every step of his journey, even the pain, even the betrayal, was leading him toward the palace. Because when the time was right, God opened a door no man could shut. There is something powerful about trusting God in the waiting season. It is in the waiting that our faith is tested. It is in the waiting that our character is refined. And it is in the waiting that God prepares us for the blessing he has in store. But waiting is hard. We don't like to wait. We want answers now. We want breakthroughs now. We want to step into the promise immediately. But there is a reason God doesn't always give us what we ask for right away. Because he knows we are not ready yet. Joseph had to go through the pit before he could enter the palace. He had to experience betrayal before he could understand forgiveness. He had to be humbled before he could be exalted. And sometimes God allows us to walk through seasons of difficulty because he is shaping us for what's coming next. If Joseph had gone straight from his father's house to Pharaoh's palace, he wouldn't have been ready. He wouldn't have had the wisdom, the maturity, or the faith to handle the responsibility God was preparing for him. And maybe that's where you are today. Maybe you're in a season of waiting, wondering why things haven't changed yet. Maybe you feel stuck, forgotten, unseen, but God sees you. He has not forgotten you. He is not punishing you. He is preparing you. You may not see it now, but every challenge, every delay, every disappointment is shaping you for what's ahead. Think of David. He was anointed as king when he was just a boy, but he didn't step into the throne immediately. He had to go back to the fields, tending sheep, facing lions and bears, learning how to fight in the unseen places. Then, even after he defeated Goliath, he spent years on the run from Saul. He could have asked, Lord, if you anointed me to be king, why am I hiding in caves? Why am I being chased like a criminal? But what David didn't realize was that the waiting wasn't wasted. It was in those years of struggle that he learned to trust God. It was in the wilderness that he learned to worship. It was in the battle that he became the man God needed him to be. And I want to tell someone today, the waiting is not wasted. What you're going through is not meaningless. God is using this season to strengthen you. He is building your faith. He is refining your character. He is positioning you for what's next. And if you hold on, if you trust him in the process, you will see the fulfillment of his promises. Isaiah 40:31 says, but they that wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings as eagles. They shall run and not be weary. And they shall walk and not faint. When you wait on God, you are not standing still. You are being strengthened. You are being renewed. You are being prepared, because when the time is right, he will open the door. And when he does, you will be ready to step into it. But the key is this: you must not lose faith in the waiting. You must not grow weary in the process. Galatians 6:9 reminds us, let us not be weary in well-doing, for in due season we shall reap if we faint not. That means there is a due season coming. There is an appointed time. There is a moment God has already set when everything will shift, when the doors will open, when the breakthrough will come. And when that moment comes, no force in hell can stop what God is about to do in your life. So if you are in a waiting season right now, don't give up. Don't grow bitter. Don't let doubt take root in your heart. God is not done with you. He is still writing your story. And if you trust him, if you hold on to his promises, you will see that everything you have been waiting for, everything you've been praying for, will come to pass in his perfect timing. Because just like Joseph, just like David, just like so many before you, your waiting is not in vain. It is preparing you for something far greater than you could ever imagine. When God is about to open a new door in your life, the enemy will do everything he can to make you doubt, to make you fearful, to make you feel like turning back. Because he knows that when you step into what God has prepared for you, you will be unstoppable. He knows that when you walk through that door, you will step into a new level of faith, a new level of purpose. And so he fights you the hardest right before the breakthrough. Some of you are in that place right now. You've been believing, you've been praying, you've been standing on God's promises, but instead of things getting easier, it feels like they're getting harder. Instead of doors opening, it seems like more doors are closing. Instead of progress, it feels like you're facing more opposition than ever before. But I want you to hear me today. Opposition is often a sign that you are close to your breakthrough. Resistance is proof that something powerful is about to happen. The enemy wouldn't be fighting you so hard if you weren't a threat. He wouldn't be trying to discourage you if you weren't on the edge of something great. Look at the story of the Israelites. God had promised them a land flowing with milk and honey. He had delivered them from Egypt, parted the Red Sea, provided for them in the wilderness. But just before they entered the promised land, they faced their biggest test yet. Giants were standing in their way. Walls surrounded the cities. The land God had promised them looked impossible to conquer. And in that moment, fear crept in. Doubt took over. Instead of trusting God, they said, we can't do this. We're like grasshoppers in our own eyes. And because of their fear, they missed out on the promise. How many times has fear robbed you of what God had for you? How many times have you stood at the door of breakthrough but turned back because it looked too hard, too impossible? The enemy wants to stop you before you ever step into your destiny. He wants to keep you in a mindset of defeat, of fear, of hesitation. But today I want to tell you, don't let fear hold you back. Don't let the enemy talk you out of what God has promised you. Think of Peter. One night in the middle of a storm, he saw Jesus walking on the water. And when Jesus called him, Peter stepped out of the boat. For a moment, he did what was impossible. He walked on water. But as soon as he took his eyes off Jesus, as soon as he focused on the wind and the waves, he began to sink. Fear took over, and he lost sight of who was standing right in front of him. How many times have we done the same thing? We start strong, we believe, we step out in faith, but then the winds start blowing, the waves start crashing, and suddenly we begin to doubt, we start to sink. But hear me today, just because there's a storm doesn't mean God isn't with you. Just because there are obstacles doesn't mean the promise isn't still yours. The enemy wants you to look at the storm, but God wants you to keep your eyes on Him. Because when you do, you'll realize that the storm has no power over you. Some of you are one step away from walking through the door God has opened, but fear is telling you to turn back. Maybe the door looks too big. Maybe the giants look too strong. Maybe the challenge seems too great. But I want you to know today that if God has opened the door, nothing can shut it. No enemy can stop you. No obstacle can hold you back. No storm can keep you from what God has prepared for you. Isaiah 41:10 says, "Fear not, for I am with you. Be not dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you. Yes, I will help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand." That means you don't have to be afraid. That means you don't have to turn back. That means you don't have to let fear steal what God has already promised you. And maybe you're saying, but I don't feel strong enough. I don't feel ready. Let me tell you something. None of us are strong enough in our own power. But the good news is you don't have to be. Because God is your strength. God is your help. God is your source. And when you step out in faith, He will equip you. He will go before you. He will fight your battles. And when He opens the door, all you have to do is walk through it. So, don't stop now. Don't let fear win. Don't let the enemy convince you to turn back. The door is right in front of you. The promise is within reach. And if you keep your eyes on Jesus, if you refuse to let fear take over, you will step into everything He has prepared for you. Because what God has opened, no man can shut. What He has promised, He will fulfill. And what He has started in your life, He will bring to completion.